Throughout history, philosophers have pondered life's biggest questions from the comfort of libraries, schools, and lecture halls. But Diogenes of Sinope? He tossed all that out the window. He didn't just reject luxury, he mocked it, tore it apart with razor-sharp wit, and lived by his own outrageous philosophy. A man who urinated on people, lived in a jar, and insulted kings. And when asked why he did it, he simply said, "It's not that I'm mad. It's just that my head is different from yours." Diogenes didn't just talk about philosophy. He lived it in ways so extreme that people still talk about him today. He believed society had enslaved itself to wealth, status, and comfort, and he set out to prove that true freedom comes from needing nothing. While many called him insane, others, including Alexander the Great, admired his bold independence. Even Plato thought he was a genius, like Socrates, but gone mad, obviously. And this mad philosopher was probably the most savage philosopher ever, a man who made the world question everything it held dear. Let's discuss. Birth of a cynic. Diogenes wasn't always the savage rebel we know today. Born around 412 BC in Sinope, a thriving Greek colony on the coast of the Black Sea, he was the son of Hysizius, a wealthy banker who managed the city's coinage. From birth, Diogenes was destined for a life of privilege and comfort, but his life took a sharp turn when he and his father were accused of devaluing the city's currency, tampering with coins for personal gain. The scandal led to their disgrace and eventual exile. Most people in his position would have sought redemption, tried to rebuild their lives or reclaimed their status. But Diogenes saw exile not as a punishment, but as an opportunity to break free from the very system that had once elevated him. Stripped of wealth and status, he chose to reject civilization altogether. Diogenes traveled to Athens, the intellectual heart of the Greek world, where he encountered Antisthenes, a disciple of Socrates. Antisthenes taught cynicism, a philosophy that rejected materialism and luxury, asserting that true happiness comes not from wealth or comfort but from living in harmony with nature. Diogenes didn't just adopt cynicism, he embodied it in a way no one had ever seen before. He didn't merely talk about rejecting wealth, he took radical action. He threw away everything he owned, choosing to live on the streets like a stray dog. Instead of a home, he took shelter in a large ceramic jar, pythos, in the Athenian marketplace. His clothing was a single tattered cloak. He begged for food, and the only possession he had was a wooden bowl, which he later discarded after witnessing a child drink water with his hands. This was the birth of Diogenes the cynic, a man who would spend the rest of his life exposing the hypocrisy and absurdity of human civilization through acts so savage that they would define his legacy. One insult at a time. Now, rejecting materialism wasn't enough for Diogenes. He wanted to prove that society's values were a lie. Diogenes was often mocked for living like an animal, with people calling him a dog. But rather than taking offense, he embraced the insult. When someone threw a bone at him as a joke, Diogenes calmly walked up to the man and urinated on him, just as a dog would. His message: "If you treat me like a dog, I'll act like one." One of Diogenes' most shocking acts occurred in the Athenian marketplace, where he was caught pleasuring himself in public. When people screamed at him in disgust, he simply shrugged and replied, "If only it were as easy to satisfy hunger by rubbing an empty belly." For Diogenes, human desires, whether for food, sex, or comfort, were natural, and society's attempts to shame them were absurd. At one point, when Plato famously defined a human being as a featherless biped, Diogenes burst into his lecture hall holding a plucked chicken. He held it up and proclaimed, "Behold, I have brought you a man." Diogenes' wit, confidence, and radical philosophy also caught the attention of Alexander the Great. When Alexander visited Diogenes, he asked, "Is there anything I can do for you?" Diogenes, unfazed, replied, "Yes, stand out of my sunlight." Embarrassed, Alexander had to leave and later remarked, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." Diogenes' sharp tongue didn't stop there. When asked about the best time to eat, he quipped, "The rich eat whenever they want, the poor whenever they have." When mocked for eating in public, Diogenes shot back, "You are the dog staring at my mouth while I eat." When he was a slave about to be sold, Diogenes mocked the slave trader who was promoting him as merchandise and simply lay down. When the trader ordered him to stand, Diogenes didn't move. "If you were selling a fish," he said, "would you bend down to pick it up with your hands?" In each of these savage replies, Diogenes sent a clear message to society. The systems we've built, our wealth, our status, our shame, are absurd, and I won't play along. His actions were not just for shock value. They were a powerful rejection of the way people live. Poverty is freedom. Diogenes believed that the more you have, the more you suffer. Wealth, in his view, wasn't a blessing. It was a prison. He once said, "In a rich man's house there is no place to spit but his face." By rejecting possessions, he freed himself from the endless cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. Diogenes' commitment to freedom was so extreme that even when pirates captured him and sold him into slavery, he remained defiant. When he was put up for auction, he shouted, "Sell me to this man, he needs a master." There is a famous story where Alexander found Diogenes lying on a pile of bones and asked what he was looking for. Diogenes replied, "Alexander's father's bones, but I cannot distinguish them from those of the slaves." Even in chains, Diogenes refused to see himself as a slave. He believed that true freedom comes from wanting nothing, because then, no one can control you. Humans are idiots. Diogenes saw civilization as a disease, corrupting people with greed, ambition, and artificial desires. He believed that humans were born pure, but became enslaved by social norms and institutions. At one point, when Athens was in a frenzy preparing for an impending war, Diogenes decided to mock the panic. He began rolling a large barrel up and down the streets. When people asked him why he was doing it, he replied, "I wanted to be seen doing something just like everyone else." Diogenes admired dogs for their simplicity and lack of shame. Unlike humans, dogs don't care about wealth, status, or appearances. They live according to nature. Diogenes encouraged people to abandon their false ambitions and live like animals, free from artificial constraints. He once said, "It is the privilege of the gods to want nothing, and of godlike men to want little." The major reason Diogenes hated society was its hypocrisy. He claimed he never found a true man. One bright, sunny day, Diogenes walked through the crowded streets of Athens holding a lantern high. As if searching for something, a curious young man approached and asked, "Why carry a lantern in such sunlight?" Diogenes replied, "I seek an honest man, but I find none." To prove his points, he even led himself to suicide. There are multiple accounts of how he died, but one story claims that he intentionally stopped breathing, believing that even breathing was a luxury he could do without. Diogenes wasn't just the most savage philosopher of all time. He was one of the most fearless thinkers in history. One question to you all. If Diogenes were alive today, what do you think he would say about our society? Same as before, or would the gaze of others affect him? Diogenes may have lived over 2,000 years ago, but his philosophy still challenges us today. In a world obsessed with status, wealth, and appearances, his life was a brutal reminder that true freedom comes not from having more, but from needing less. He dared to laugh at kings, philosophers, and society itself, proving that sometimes the greatest rebellion is simply refusing to care. But now the question is, what do you think? Was Diogenes a madman or a genius? A rebel or a fool? And most importantly, what would he say about the world we live in today? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this dive into history's most savage philosopher, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more mind-blowing stories from the past. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay curious, stay fearless.